If you're looking for clear, pro-life thinking, cutting-edge apologetics, and a fresh approach to abortion dialogue, you've come to the right place. This is the Equipped for Life podcast.
All right. Well, we have a special guest in studio. It is Emily Albrecht. She is back, who used to be just the co-president of the St. Olaf Pro-Life Club and is now also on staff as a speaker, writer, coach. And we've got a couple of really cool podcasts that we're recording today that are going to be really focused on helping other pro-life clubs. There's a lot of like who we want to reach the most, who we're wanting to help, because it's really important for college students to be having good conversations about abortion on their campuses. And you have been for a couple of years now part of our favorite pro-life club on any campus. Yes, we kind of do play favorites, but you guys are that good. And I really liked the idea that you brought for this podcast, though, which is instead of just talking about all the things that went really well, we have told that story before. If you haven't heard the story about Emily and her awesome club, I'll put a link in the description below to a different podcast of you telling that awesome, motivational, inspirational story. We're not talking about that today, though. Instead, we're going to talk about kind of what your club had to go through to get as good at outreach as you got to, like when I came and watched. Because again, when I watched you guys doing outreach, I was amazed because I was like, I feel like I'm just watching our staff all have conversations. Like I don't have a lot of like, boy, you really need to work on you need to find more common ground, or you're not asking enough questions, or your arguments, you're missing some of those really nuanced philosophical points. Like everyone is just like nailing it all the time. But apparently you guys didn't instantly get to being that good. And so Today we're going to talk about the mistakes and the different like things that you guys went through in order to learn how to get as good as you ended up getting at outreach. And one of the things that I like about what you're going to be sharing today is that this isn't, I think this is super helpful for any college pro-life club. Like you are about to get a master class in these next several episodes, but it's not just for college clubs. Even though like a lot of your stories are from being at St. Olaf College, I think a lot of this will apply to outreaches that high school clubs want to do. Again, in like a post-COVID world, you're going to be talking about pre-COVID outreaches that you guys did, but also pro-life groups at churches that are, wanting to learn together and then at some point do outreach, maybe partnering with a Students for Life club on a campus and doing outreach together or something like that. So like there's a lot that everyone can take from the experiences that your awesome club had, especially being able to kind of get to look back and see what are the mistakes, kind of probably some of the obvious, easy mistakes that everyone makes towards the beginning, and what was that development like? So talk a little bit about the history of outreach at St. Olaf.
Sure. So the summer after my freshman year is when we first kind of discovered ERI and discovered the Equipped for Life course. And we were really excited as soon as we started going through it. We all kind of realized that this was going to be a game changer for us because it's just a completely different way of engaging with our campus than we had ever tried before. And so we were really excited to get started. So we started going through the course, just me and like 3 other people, because at the time my club was super tiny. So if that's you out there with the super tiny club, I get you. That's what I was too. We had about 4 of us and we went through the course. You can get a lot
done with 3 or 4
really
awesome club members.
You really can. I mean, it's great to have more, and I'm very grateful for my club now, but don't be discouraged. You can do awesome things. And so we started trying to do some awesome things. We went through the course, and that kind of first semester, we just focused on getting the material under our belts. We did not try any outreach. We just took the time to learn and practice. And I really encourage you, if you're trying to go through the course or learn pro-life apologetics for the first time, make sure you do set aside time where you're not getting ready for an impending outreach. You have that time to really digest the information, to really practice the information, because that was really, really valuable for us.
Yeah. The way that I've thought about that, like it's easy, I think, to fall into mistakes or pitfalls on both sides of that. Is like on one end, I do generally want like a new club, like everyone's kind of fresh, everyone's kind of new to pro-life apologetics. Take a few months and kind of do boot camp, do the course, be talking as a club about how you want to do outreach. But don't be like, we're not doing outreach for a really, really long time either. Like it's too easy to get like, let's just keep on doing boot camp and getting better and better and better and better. And eventually like everyone's graduating and you've not talked to any pro-choice people. That's not good. But at the same time, I think it's like the mistakes that you can make in your initial conversations can be big enough that it's worth taking a little bit of time and trying to avoid some of the really easy mistakes to avoid. And then after a couple of months or something like that, whatever your club needs, go ahead and get out there. And once you're out there, don't be constantly afraid, like, oh my gosh, should we even be out here? Like kind of everyone has imposter syndrome. Like you're going to make mistakes. It's going to be okay, but you're probably going to avoid the really bad ones.
Right. I think you just perfectly described what my club started to fall into with an imposter syndrome when we very first started. Because we definitely fell on the end of the spectrum of wanting to make sure that it was perfect before we ever tried to do outreach. So we took, in my opinion, too long to do outreach. And at the time, I was totally in the imposter syndrome club. But like looking back on it now, I'm saying we should have been out there sooner because we very much so had this fear that we needed to have all the answers. And until we had all of the answers, we knew how to respond perfectly to everything. We had rehearsed it a million times over and we'd never make a mistake. That was the day we were allowed to start doing outreach. And
I really get that, though. If I were to make either of these mistakes in a campus club, that would be the one that I would make. Is I'm afraid of turning people off to the pro-life position, and I would rather like take this extra time, and that's why we really want to encourage people. Get out there.
Yeah. I mean, it can be really overwhelming, just like the thought of doing outreach.
Yeah.
And so I think what changed for us is when we started talking about what mindset we should have going into outreach, because the mindset we started out with was, this is overwhelming. This is intimidating. We need to change the world and change everyone's mind. It's all up to us. If I mess up this one conversation,
it's over.
It's over.
Yeah.
Like that was our initial
Shut down
mindset.
the club.
And no wonder we were terrified to go out and do outreach, right? Like that is exactly why we weren't getting anything done, is because that was the mindset we had. And so we had a lot of conversations among our officers about what the purpose of outreach should be. And I think that really helped to change the mindset and make us feel more like we were in a position to not let the perfect get in the way of the good. And we could go out there and make an impact, even if it wasn't a perfect impact. Because spoiler alert, you're really never going to have a perfect conversation where you look back and you're like, I said absolutely everything the exact way I wanted to. That's not going to happen.
No.
I'm sorry, but it's just not. And so we had a lot of conversations about outreach as just a way to talk to people, as a way to learn about others' ideas, as a way to express our own ideas, and just invite people to conversation about a difficult topic. Like, yes, I am out there because I'm pro-life and I want to tell people about that. And I'd love to see people change their minds. But to have a mindset that I have to change people's minds on my campus is not healthy and not helpful for you as a club when you're first starting, even ever.
Yeah.
But especially when you're first starting, you just need a mindset that we're here to help create better political dialogue on campus, to help understand each other.
That's a much smaller goal. We just want to improve the way people are talking about politics or abortion or whatever. That's easier than we're going to change every single mind of like every single person that we talk to in one conversation. It's gonna be, like,
yes,
awesome.
Exactly.
What is it that helped your group collectively pivot from the place of being afraid, imposter syndrome, we're not ready to get out there? At some point, you guys did get out there. And so what is it that helped you guys figure out, all right, it's time to get out? Or maybe even looking back retroactively, we could have gone out even sooner than this. Like, what led to that change?
I think it was partially Meredith, who is my vice president
Meredith
at the time.
Is awesome.
She's currently my co-president. She definitely wins the award for being the one who pushed us to kind of, we need to go out there and do this and stop waiting. And the fact that we had someone who was willing to kind of make that push, I think really helped, first of all. And then second of all, the fact that we knew we had this core group of us who would be doing it together. It wasn't like I was going to go out and stand on this outreach table by myself. I had no backup. I had no help.
Right.
When I knew I was walking to the table with Meredith and with Joshua, my co-president, and with Alex. Alex is somebody who graduated a few years ago who was a really big part of that core initial group. And he was doing some awesome work when the four of us would go to the outreach table together.
You were a team.
We were a team.
You were the Avengers.
Also, I feel like we had different strengths.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which I'll get into more later.
Okay.
But I think the fact that the four of us had different areas made us all feel like I had someone I could go to for backup if I needed help.
Yeah.
Like Meredith always started out on our team as being the person who is the best at making a final push in a conversation. And Joshua was always the best at keeping things really relational and friendly. And they kind of balanced each other out and they could work together and coach each other. And we felt like we were a team and none of us were out there alone, one woman pro-life showing it against the world.
Yeah.
And so I think just knowing that and having that camaraderie that we had practiced together and we had done this helped us to shift that mindset, as well as just the conversations we had as officers about what is the purpose of outreach. And as long as we were all very clear about what the purpose of outreach was.
And what it wasn't.
And what it wasn't, more importantly, I think that really helped us make that switch and go out there for the first few times. Because I'd say maybe the first, maybe 4-ish times, I was terrified. Like it took me to push myself to go about 4 times before I started to feel comfortable in the situation.
You know you're not an imposter. You know you've got some conversations under your belt. It's like, okay, I can handle it. It's going to be okay kind of a thing.
Exactly.
It's really interesting that you guys figuring out early on what everyone's kind of biggest strengths were as kind of this Avengers team going out to do battle, on your campus, how that was kind of this positive, it reinforced that we can do it. Like we've got the same thing on our staff. Like I would say, think about the categories that you said. Like Jacob by far is the best at initiating conversations with people. Like he has no problem just as people are walking by who clearly are not planning on stopping and be like, hey, like drawing them in for a conversation. Whereas I'm like super uncomfortable about that. Whereas Tim, I think, has been the best person on our staff so far at the final push in the conversation. And I think I've been the best at like the super friendly relational guy, like in the middle of the conversation. So like, I imagine every group is going to have kind of those different people are going to be naturally good at different things. I'm wondering, just so people can keep the chronology in their heads, like how long did you guys end up waiting between like you guys starting training, starting doing the course and stuff like that, and when you did your first outreach? How long was that span of time? And looking back on it, how soon do you think you guys could have gotten out there, or you wish that you had gotten out there?
I believe we started doing the training in about August. And I think it was until January before we went out for the first time. It might have been November. I'm struggling to remember off the top of my head whether it was right before Christmas break, like whether we did one outreach that semester, or whether we waited until we were back in school in January. I truly don't remember which one it is. I like the fact that we took at least, say, half a semester to go through the course by ourselves. Like, I think you need 2-3 months, maybe.
Yeah. It's a lot of information.
It's a lot of information to process.
And especially if you're practicing, like I know in your group, you didn't just watch the videos. You also were getting in pairs and getting in circles and practicing a lot, which takes up a lot of time too.
Yeah. So I think probably November would be a good time. Let's say you're starting at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
You give yourself till near the end of the semester, assuming your semester ends in December, which ours does. Yeah. That's enough time to get maybe 2 outreaches in before the end of that semester. Because I think it's a bad idea to everybody go home over Christmas break and you never had a chance to actually try what you'd been working on that whole semester.
Yeah.
Because if you haven't gotten a chance to practice using it, you're going to be way more rusty when you come back.
Yeah.
Because all you've really done is learn the material and you've gotten to do a little bit of practice dialoguing with your pro-life friends, which is super helpful.
Yeah.
Like, do that. But also it's not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so I think make sure that you can get maybe 2 outreaches done before the end of the semester would have been better for us.
I think that's really smart. And this is the thing that like our friends at Justice for All, they have found. This is why, like historically speaking, like especially like before COVID, they kind of had this model of training where they would do a seminar and be like an intensive, like all day seminar. But then it's like, how do we get you to outreach like the next day, or like at least, maybe if the seminar's on Friday or Saturday, like Monday, we are doing outreach together because we don't want you to forget already like some of the things that you learn. Like now you're ready to go. Let's go do it. Because if you do outreach at least once or twice, then right after the seminar, then it helps kind of cement a lot of that knowledge. So totally tracking with what you're saying.
Exactly. Another really interesting thing about our initial outreach experience is that we didn't use exactly the standard SARL table that ERI teaches.
The should abortion
the
remain
should abortion
legal.
remain legal table. Yes, the SARL table. We used an interesting table that, looking back on, all of us kind of scratch our heads and go, what about this made us think it was a good idea?
What was it?
So I have a photo of it for you that I can provide, but I will describe it all
I will put it on screen.
Beautiful. So first of all, we just had a table in Bontrac Commons, which we were sitting down behind.
Oh, no.
There was like 2 or 3 chairs.
Common mistake.
Yeah, very common mistake. The front of the table was covered with a huge Students for Life of America poster. So it was very clear who we are, what organization we were affiliated with. Then we had like writing paper, essentially like a big sheet of poster paper on the top of the table, on which was written, should abortion remain legal in the United States? So the question was there, but it was like laying down on top of the table, like written in Sharpie, flat on the table.
So it wasn't a paper that was meant for people to like write on. It wasn't like a free speech board kind of a thing.
Sure, yes, it was.
Oh, it kind of was.
Kind of was. So like, should abortion remain legal was like written on the table, and then we had a bunch of Sharpies laid out so that people could write their responses as if it was kind of on a yes, no, maybe pad.
Right.
But like on the table.
all over the place.
All over the table. Exactly.
I've seen worse. I've seen worse.
It was not awful. But looking back on it.
Yeah. What is it that you wish you guys had done differently? Like you critique what the problems were there and what were the things that you stopped doing later.
I think the biggest problem with it is it was so easy to ignore.
Yeah.
Like I have seen hundreds of club tables that look exactly like that for people on the bowling team or the ballroom dance club or whatever who are sitting down behind a table and they've got a sign and it kind of just looks like they're advertising something. Like you're not really sure what exactly they're doing. Like it doesn't invite engagement because you can't actually read the should abortion remain legal question until you walk up to the table.
That's a very important point.
Across the hall is going to see Students for Life of America be like, oh, they're recruiting, advertising.
And
I
not
don't know.
Pro-life, so why would I go over there? So why would I go over there?
Exactly. And so you like had to be a certain distance away in order to see it. And like we did have conversations, but like I would say we got maybe 2 conversations a day at that table. Like we were not doing well. It was not working. It looked exactly like the kind of table that I, as a student, always ignore.
Actively ignore,
That's exactly what it is.
Don't make eye contact. Don't make eye contact.
Exactly, because we kind of look like we're just obnoxious pro-lifers that are sitting there in front of our sign saying we're pro-life.
Come join our club. We've got meetings.
Like that's not.
Yeah.
It's not telling us to do anything. I love one of my club members, Felisa, when we were all reflecting on this, when we were changing things, she described it as that display just looks like a giant pro-life billboard.
Yeah. With a couple of people behind it.
Not directing anyone towards a conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe pro-life billboard is your goal, but that was not our goal. And we had a table that was unfortunately doing that.
Right.
Our body language also was not inviting. Because when you're just like sitting down behind a table, it looked like we were just kind of staring people down. And it forced other people to take 100% of the initiative to walk over to us and start a conversation.
Most people don't want to do that.
Most people don't want to do that.
This is what Jacob has taught me. Again, I'm horrible at like inviting people over. I feel so uncomfortable. And Jacob is this like master at inviting people over with even kind of quirky, kind of funny ways. Like he'll do that. And so I'm totally tracking. You have to invite people in if you want.
You have to take at least more than 50% of the initiative to like reach out to them in some way. And at this table, when like imagine you're walking by a table with 4 people just sitting behind it.
Right.
That's intimidating even without the giant we're pro-life sign. Like you're like, I don't know what they want.
Right. And if I come over there, it's 1 versus 4.
Right.
Like, I don't,
exactly. Not inviting at all. And it's also just very not clear what we want
Right.
as a table.
Right.
So like you can kind of see that there's like these Sharpies sitting there and you're like, are they asking me to sign something? I don't know. So it was just a very ambiguous table from the perspective of an outsider, which made it not helpful. We figured out pretty quickly that setup was not working. I think we tried it twice. I want to say we tried it twice.
Okay.
Like our very first 2 times, we were like, okay, this is not working for us.
It wasn't just the first time. There's a pattern here. What's the pattern?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So eventually we switched to the standard ERI, should abortion be legal sign
Which
up.
we really took from Justice for All.
Right.
Like, it's really the JFA thing. The only thing that we've added to it is we've added the it depends option in the middle. JFA had always kind of done yes versus no. I think they might be doing it depends now. I'm not positive, but I know that was a thing that we added like in the first year of ERI. Just like, we didn't want people to feel like we were forcing them into an extreme. It's like, whatever you label yourself, I don't care how you label yourself. Just like, whatever, just come on over, that kind of thing. But yeah, they came up with should abortion be legal. It's just like, it's hard to beat that question. We've tried.
It's such a good question.
We've tried a bunch of other questions, and I never liked them as much as should abortion. And like, we've the only one, there's something like should late-term abortion be, or should abortion be legal at 20 weeks? It's kind of the alt. That's pretty close to Sarl, but it's a little bit more focused, and yet doesn't seem to lose us a bunch of conversations. So we kind of go back and forth between those. But we've tried others, and none of them go as well. We've tried do pro-lifers annoy you? We've tried, something about like equal rights or human rights. Like, we've tried different things, and yeah, we kind of keep on coming back to should abortion remain legal?
Yeah. I think the really interesting thing about our old table versus the standard one is that the should abortion remain legal part actually stayed the same. Because we had that exact verbiage on the very first sign.
Right.
But it was just the way the table was set up that switched. And
the way
I think
perspective
that's key.
works.
Like,
was the problem.
Exactly. I think the standard Sarl table really demands your attention because of the bright colors it uses. Because like, if you can put the yes on a green and the no on a red and it depends on a yellow, like you see it coming from miles away. And it's also very, very clear what the people standing at the table are here for. Like, as a student walking by, they want me to come over and answer this question. That's what this is about. You're always not even sure if they're pro-life or pro-choice or some random group. Like, you don't necessarily know who they are.
I like that about it too.
Which is really helpful. And there's just like a clear expectation from the people walking by of what's going on, what's going to happen if I go over there. They're going to ask me questions. They're going to ask me to write something down, whatever.
You've posed a question.
Exactly.
That is, in itself is an invitation. And I assume, and then you've also, I'm assuming, solved the perspective problem by having the question sign either standing up on the table or maybe also taped to the table.
Yes.
How did you do that?
We put the question sign standing up in like a triangle formation on the top of the table, and then the yes, no, it depends things were hanging down in front of the table.
Got it.
So it's not an easily ignorable table.
Yeah.
And people can still choose not to come over.
Right.
But in our first table, they were choosing not to come over because they were just
ignoring
it. They were confused. They didn't know what was happening. And like, this new table is not just this vanilla, oh, look, it's another club tabling that I can ignore. Like, they see it. They actively have to make a choice what they're going to do. Because you just can't ignore the giant sign. You just can't do it. And it's just no longer a giant pro-life billboard, which I think is helpful.
Yeah.
Another thing that happened, I think, partially as a result of that really bad first table was we had really low attendance at those first outreaches.
And
which
then the
I kind
following
of
meetings, do you mean? Or
no,
where?
really low attendance at the table. Like, we had few pro-choice people coming up.
Just the 4 core people.
We had
or
the
whatever.
4 core people, and we were talking to incredibly few people.
Got it.
Like, we were talking to like 2 to 4 pro-choice people.
Not very many people are coming to the table.
Not many people are coming up to the table, and there weren't a lot of us tabling. That was a little, I think, less of a concern because we knew we didn't have that many, and we were hoping we could recruit more, whatever. It was more of a concern for there is no one wanting to engage with our table.
Right.
And I think the reasons for that are pretty obvious based on the conversation we just had.
Right.
But that even started once we switched to the standard Sarl setup. It takes a while for pro-choice people, in my experience, to want to come talk to you.
Right. You can't just do one outreach in a semester and call it a semester. Hey, we did our token outreach of the time, because you're going to it seems like your club found you're going to have higher attendance the more outreaches you do, as people see you out there, there's this pattern. You guys are out to doing a similar thing, and you've talked about sometimes people maybe the fourth, fifth, sixth time that they see you guys, then they will decide to come and talk to you for the first time.
Exactly. It takes people a while to work up the energy, the annoyance, the anger, whatever it is, to like actually want to come over and say something.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be in the same day. Like, it's really helpful if your tabling period is long.
Yeah.
Because people will like see you in the morning and then walk by you again on their way to lunch, and then they see you a third time, and then it just keeps building until they finally feel like they have to come see you.
Yeah. It's helpful if you can be set up and ready to go by the time people are walking to their first class period. That is great because, of course, they're not expecting to see you. So they're surprised the first time they see you, and they're not likely to stop because they are on their way to class. They did not build in time to talk to a club about abortion. But they might be thinking about, okay, is there a time later in the day where I could, make some time between classes or whatever, and then come back later. And so if you can stay until 3 or 4 or whatever, then you've given them, more opportunity than if you pack it up at lunchtime, which is like the busiest time anyway. Like don't pack it up at lunchtime.
If you can avoid it,
if you packed up at like 1:30 or something as opposed to like 4, there's more time for people to like, all right, I've got 45 minutes here before my next class. I can go and talk to the pro-lifers.
Right. Exactly. And I think that it also just bears realizing, I guess, that you can be having a giant impact even when no one's talking to you.
Talk about that.
Precisely because of what you just said, because it takes people time to think about wanting to come over, to kind of come up with what they want to say. And so those first few outreaches, I don't think were, quote, pointless. Even if I only talked to 2 pro-choice people and I spent 3 hours sitting there smiling in front of my outreach table, I was still changing the perception, I guess, that the students on my campus had of me. First of all, they were seeing that they had a pro-life club, which quite honestly, most of them didn't know existed before. They were seeing this nice, smiling female college student standing in front of it, and they were like, what the heck is she doing? They had time to start digesting this information and figuring out whether they'd want to come engage with us. What are we doing? She seems kind of nice and friendly. Like, her body language is really inviting, which is key.
You're not sitting behind the table at this point,
Correct.
Right?
We've now moved out, and so we're doing our standard, like, standing or sitting in front of the table. Sitting on the table is my personal favorite. I love, like, sitting on the corner in the front of it because I'm really short, and that actually often makes me higher than I would be.
So that's
if
funny.
I was
You're
standing.
doing it for, like, the opposite reason than I am doing. I'm doing it because I'm super tall, and I don't want to, like, lord my height over the short people on campus. And
I
you're
do
like,
it to get taller.
I'm going to be able to match the eye lines of the pro-choice guys that come by. That's hilarious.
That is exactly true.
But it also looks relaxed. And I think that's like the most important
relaxed.
thing. Yeah.
And so just by sitting there and smiling, even if you're not talking to anyone, you can still be making a really big impact.
Yeah.
And so we got discouraged by the fact that those first few outreaches didn't have high attendance. And looking back, we shouldn't have been as discouraged as we were.
Right.
Because I don't think we realized until much later on that it takes people a while to want to come over.
Yeah.
And that you can still be changing people's intuitions about you and who you are just by being there and being friendly.
Yeah.
And so
this is not how they expect anti-abortion, meanies to look.
Exactly.
Like you were affecting the stereotypes just by you being there and being friendly and clearly inviting for conversations. You're not just there to, here's my opinion. Like, you're just like, oh, come on, let's talk. Let's have the conversation.
Exactly. Which also brings us to, at the beginning, we did not know how to effectively invite people in for conversation. Yeah. Like, starting conversations was super awkward. We would basically sit, at least before we switched the tabling setup, we were sitting behind the table silently, which is super weird and scary and
as opposed to shouting at them though, like, hey, you want to come talk to us over here?
Right, which is also probably not super helpful. But then when we switched setups, then it was like me sitting on the corner of the table smiling and waving, but that's like a step better. Yeah. But we still at that point hadn't learned how to actually invite people.
You're doing what I'm most comfortable doing, which is just Me being here is the invitation. Like, take it or leave
Right.
it. Like, I
Exactly.
don't want to call out and put myself out
that's
there.
definitely the most comfortable thing for me too. I think
Yeah.
it's most comfortable for most people
Yeah.
to just do that. And if that's where you're at right now,
It's a lot better
that
than
is
nothing.
a lot better than nothing. That is a lot better than the sitting behind the table in
Yes.
silence, staring people down,
Yes.
which was my first outrage. But if you can start to even just memorize a few opening lines, that's what it took
Yeah.
for me to start getting comfortable with that, is to have a few that I could just say, like, hey, do you want to take our poll?
Mhm.
Or once someone's actually come over, if they're writing, because usually at our tables we'll have notepads in
Yeah.
front of the yes, no, and it depends. And so people will come over, and the very first thing they start doing is writing, which they like feel like they know they're supposed to do because they see the pads of paper and the pencil there.
Yeah.
So if somebody finishes, then I'll say, hey, could I ask what you wrote? Or do you mind if I ask you your thoughts on this?
Yeah.
And if I just have a couple of those one-liners in my back pocket to start the conversation,
Yeah.
then it gets moving and I don't feel like I'm on a script anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like I can just organically do this. But it's hard to organically start a conversation if you don't have an idea of what you're doing.
Especially because there's also this like really short window of time too. If you like, most people aren't that quick on their feet. And so, you know, if you know you've got as the person's kind of walking by, you've got like 3 seconds or whatever it is, you then having that kind of line in your back pocket is going to make it more likely you're going to get it out in that time and then see if they'll do it. Have you heard our story before of us, of Jacob and I at an outreach where Jacob showed me about how he invited people and he had like a way that didn't work and a way that did work? Are you familiar with the story?
I'm not familiar with this
I'm not going to
story.
tell the story perfectly because I don't remember exactly how Jacob did it, but it was really funny. So we are at outreach at Winthrop University, and I'm having this problem. I'm getting frustrated. I've been like standing in front of our table for like 45 minutes, being ignored by every student walking by, and I'm like, I just want to get into a conversation, but I'm also not reaching out. And so Jacob came up and like talking about like, well, you got to invite people, and I'm like, I'm not very good at that, And so he's like, he kind of watched me like try to like, hey, you want to come take our poll? I think was something like what I was doing, and it wasn't working. And I'm like putting myself out there over and over with this line, and I've got 0% success rate for 45 minutes. I'm just like, I'm not happy. And so he said, okay, let's do this together. I'm going to be the one that invites people, and I want you to watch the next 5 people who come by are not going to do the poll. I said, okay. And as people walked by, he said, I think like the same line that I did. It's like, hey, would you like to take our poll? Would you like to take our poll? And like, it didn't work. So the next 5 people that walk by are going to come to the table. And I'm like, speak prophet, like what? And he's so confident. That's Jacob. He's super confident. And what he did, the change was something along the lines of, would you help me out with something? And they're like, what? Like, would you please take our poll over there? And kind of like with the implication, like we've got like this quota we need to fill or something like this. Like, would you do me this favor of just doing the poll? They'd be like, oh, sure. Okay. And they'd walk right over to the table. 5 out of 5. He nailed it. And I'm just like, how are you so good at this? But like just changing that wording made a huge difference, at least on that campus.
Yeah, I think it's really important to experiment with that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Kind of like Jacob did. And if you have a line that works for you, go for it.
Yeah.
I think it also has a lot to do with how you present yourself too. Like as a student, the kind of language that you use. I have found things to throw, like, do you want to take our poll, to be somewhat effective, but usually only if I say it in a really nonchalant way, and even a like, hey, how you doing? You want to come take our poll?
Yeah.
That kind of thing gets a lot more response than just like, hi, would you like to take our poll?
Yeah. That's
like if you say it straight, that's not going to do that. And I think one of the things that made Jacob stand out is it was super personal.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I need you to help me with this. Like, it had his style to it instead of him just kind of like rattling off this statement like a robot.
And I wonder if one of the difference makers between his method working better for him versus your method, which was simply more like what I was doing and failing at, is the difference between, at this point, I am clearly not a student. And you are. And I wonder if that's the difference there, is it feels different for the students. They feel like just another student is like maybe working on a project or something like that versus clearly some outside group is here doing something, is advocating for something. I wonder if that's part of what's making the difference there. I don't really know.
I think you could be absolutely right about that. That would make a lot of sense to me. Why I've had more luck with more of a standard line.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Okay, so once you invited people over and you succeeded, like they stop and they kind of come over to you, at that point, what are you doing?
So usually we would be able to just kind of start into a conversation. They would write something on the table. I would
Mhm.
ask them what they wrote,
Mhm.
and things would go great. But one thing we were really bad at was how to answer the question, "Who are you guys and what are you doing here?" Because that came up more often than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Like someone would want to kind of turn the tables and ask me to be the first one to answer the question.
Yeah, I've got a
And-
standard response to this. I'm really looking forward to hearing what your guys ended up being.
So we kind of had to brainstorm a little bit. We're like, how do we effectively answer this? Because we want to say we're pro-life. Like, I don't want to be wishy-washy and pretend that I'm not who
Right.
I am.
Yeah.
And we want to admit we're the pro-life group on campus. But we also don't want to turn them off from talking to me as
Right.
soon as the words "I'm pro-life"
Yep.
come out of my mouth.
Yep.
And so how do we do that? So kind of the standard line we all came up
Well,
with.
before you give the standard
Oh,
line,
okay.
like give me like the first attempt. Like when you guys got surprised by the question, do you have any memory of probably less optimal attempt at responding to that?
Something along the lines of, we're pro-life. I'm pro-life. We're here just kind of talking to people about abortion. We were just like seeing if people have answers to this question. And maybe like, I'd love to hear what you think. Maybe you want to hear what I think. So like, it wasn't an awful
It wasn't bad.
response, but
It's
it was
not
just like
bad.
awkward.
I know you can do better, but okay, it's not bad. Okay, so now tell me where you guys kind of ended up after some brainstorming and trying things.
First, we tried to condense it, first of all. So it wasn't this, because what I just kind of did was this kind of
paragraph.
rambly, like, I don't
Run-on
know, I'm
sentence.
thinking on my feet thing.
Yeah.
And so I think the more concise you can get it, the better. And the less you can be afraid of admitting you're pro-life, the better. So ours was something along the lines of, we're the pro-life group on campus. We're just here trying to create more productive political dialogues, because I think people are often really bad at talking to other people who have different ideas. What do you think about this?
That's great.
So we would all do like variations on that. We didn't have like a script we wanted people to memorize, but I think the key points were we did start by saying we're the pro-life group.
Right.
We talked about the idea that we're here because we want dialogue.
Yep.
And we think people are often bad at dialogue.
Yep.
What do you think about this?
That's really, really similar to the line that I've been doing.
Okay, what's the line that you use?
I try to like add a little bit of humor to it, but that's functionally outside of the very first part because I wouldn't be part of the pro-life club on campus. But I would say something like, I'm thinking of this was really important at Portland Community College. So I've got like multiple stories that our followers have heard me tell about Portland Community College, like Gabriel, the tall, obnoxious guy, and us being on this campus on April 20, on 420, and it was pot day, and it smelled like pot all day, and we're in front of the cafeteria.
I remember this
and it's
story.
like, so that's the outreach. But we didn't realize, or no, I think we did. I think maybe we knew as we were getting to campus, but either way, I think we didn't know when we first booked the outreach with the Students for Life Club on campus that the Students for Life Club was like at that point hated on campus, not because of anything the Students for Life Club did. The problem they were dealing with was they were super on the defensive already because, and this might trigger some of our listeners, but this is just what happened, was 6 to 9 months before we showed up, a separate pro-life group had come to do outreach on their campus. They didn't work at all with the club. And this particular group, and I don't even know which group it's not one of the big groups. It's like a local group, I think. But they brought really big graphic abortion victim image signs. And that was their thing. They set up these signs and they would try to talk to people and then they packed up and left. Okay. So like there's multiple groups that do that. There's some groups that I even like that do that. Sometimes we got friends who, if you want to, I'll post a link in the description to our an article that we have about abortion images. But the problem was that group ended up maybe accidentally the day they picked to do their graphic image outreach was like family field trip day. Like this is like every year Portland Community College has this thing where like they're trying to get families to come and hang out. So there's like face paint and balloon animals, like totally bring all the little kids to college day.
Oh boy.
And that was the day. I imagine it wasn't intentional on the pro-lifers' part, but it is what they ended up doing. And they didn't just leave. They didn't like see, this is not the day for this and just pack up. They stayed there. So at this point, the campus hates all pro-lifers. And so the Pro-Life Club has been on the defensive and kind of like just like having their meetings, trying to figure out what to do. Again, they all mean well, they're doing their best. And so we show up. So we're doing our outreach, which looks exactly like the one that you described. And everyone walking by, like it's like they're still triggered by this thing that had happened 6 or 9 months ago. And so they would come up very, very suspicious. And it would be like, they would literally be saying, who are you and what are you doing on our campus? Like that kind of thing, thinking maybe we're the same group or something. And so I would just kind of say, hey, we're trying to help pro-life and pro-choice people have dialogues about abortion. Because I think typically when pro-life and pro-choice people talk to each other, they kind of suck at it. And so we're trying to help people to have better conversations and like learn from each other and listen to each other, find common ground, and hopefully even push the conversation further, like have a really productive dialogue. What do you think about abortion? So it'd be the exact same thing. We're trying to say, here, we're trying to have dialogues. We're inviting this to be with pro-life and pro-choice people. People are usually bad at it, and we want to see that be better. And as soon as I would say that, like to a person, every student would be like, they would like drop their defense. They'd be like, oh, okay. Like it was just so different than what they thought we were doing, and they were fine with it. And so, yeah, so having some kind of line, however you want to word it, or however much humor you want to try to inject into it, like I think that those key points are going to almost always be really helpful.
Absolutely.
So talk to me a little bit about, when you started doing, like your first outreach, you've got 4 pro-lifers sitting behind this table, staring people down. What, if anything, did you change once you kind of changed your outreach setup down the road?
We started to become very aware of who was at the table, which we weren't always aware of. And that was partially because we only really had 4 people at the beginning that were trained. Yeah. And so we didn't really have much of an option around who was going to do outreach. But once we started to have more and more students that were prepared to do outreach, we had to start planning and scheduling our outreaches very carefully because we learned, unfortunately, from a not so great experience, that you always need to have some very specific people at the table. Primarily, you always need to have a main leader expert person, or 2.
So like a club officer,
like a club officer
who can answer questions,
who can take some more difficult conversations, can come in and help if someone needs it, who can deal with an administrative person walking by who wants to know how your club is allowed to do this, or like anything like that. Like you need to have a person who is clearly labeled as the in charge at this event person who is there. And that can switch out during the day.
Yes.
Like it doesn't like I have to be there the entire day. But I would take like a 3-hour shift, and then Meredith would take like a 3-hour shift, and then Joshua would take like a 3-hour shift.
As opposed to you guys doing this at the same time and then putting a couple of like rookies alone at the table for 3 hours.
Exactly.
Like you're always having at least one pro and at least one kind of rookie, like newer person.
Right. Exactly. We tended to have a leader-ish person, a rookie, newer person, and then a spot we created called the shadow spot.
Oh, tell me about the shadow spot.
Yes. So if you're a brand new member to our club and you're maybe partway through the Equip for Life course, we love to get you some outreach experience without actually having you have to talk to anyone.
Yeah.
Because that can help them feel way more comfortable and not go through that imposter syndrome that the rest of us did at the beginning. Because they've had just a taste of it. They feel like they're listening to some conversations and they feel like maybe they could answer these questions. They just have a feeling they know what it's like. And so basically what the shadow does is they sign up, they come to the table, and they just kind of follow around at a distance one of the pro-lifers, usually the leader who's there.
Yeah.
So they don't stand right behind their shoulder and like awkwardly listen in on the conversation, but they just kind of hang back and check out the scene, listen to how the conversations are going, and just start to feel comfortable in that environment.
Yeah. There's a couple of cool things going on there, too, where, like, not only are they seeing, okay, the worst case scenario maybe that's been in my head about what outreach would look like is not usually what's happening here. Like, this is fine. Everyone's fine. We're not being screamed at all day kind of a thing.
Exactly.
But then also, there's this really important thing going on that, like, there's a certain deficit to the Equip for Life course that I'm hoping to fill. Like we've kind of partially filled it, but we've never gotten it to the point where we even originally envisioned it, which is helping people to put all the tools together. So like we've got several podcasts with example dialogues. We made that for this reason. Like, because people are like, okay, I've just learned 50 different arguments. Where do they go? And how often are you finding common ground? How many clarification questions are you asking before you make your argument? Like just like those things that you just kind of learn by doing dialogue. And so while the original intention when we first filmed the course in that like blue walled room, like the original plan was we were going to have example dialogues in every module. We just ran out of time. We only had 3 days to film, and we went to the very end of the third day finishing up like the bodily rights module. Like we just didn't have time. And so there's always going to be like one day we will add those. And I still am planning on doing it. Hopefully this year we'll finally have that. But that has been a challenge for a lot of people. And so you having shadow people come in who are kind of in the midst of going through the course, they are watching you guys put these pieces together, and they're kind of seeing how this all works together.
Exactly. I've found it to be so helpful in helping our rookies to really get the flow of a conversation.
Yeah.
And feel like they could start to navigate. Because when I do practice dialogues with someone for the very first time, they like we play the timeout game every 5 seconds. Like when pro choice Emily makes a new argument, like they know, I always like preface it like they can time out at any point, and pro life Emily will turn on and help figure out what you should say. We'll have a sidebar. And so like anytime I say any pro choice argument, we immediately have to time out and talk about, okay, well, where would we go from there? Let's ask these 2 clarification questions, or let's make this argument, whatever. They just need help figuring out the roadmap. And so it's really helpful for them to hear me go through the roadmap in a very, very natural, real-life conversation. It just makes them feel at ease and start to get the flow better. So we kind of transitioned from, once we had more people that could do outreach, to a more of a leader expert person, plus a new person, plus a shadow, and even a second leader expert if you can get it. I think our ideal is 3 to 4 people at the table.
Got it.
Just due to the numbers that were coming in. And I think that you can vary the numbers you have based on how many people you get. We never have there be one person alone at the table. There always needs to be 2. We found that 5 is too many. So we like the between 2 and 4, with the ideal being 3 to 4.
Yeah. So, and I would have, so it's interesting. So I would have thought maybe ideal more like 2 to 3 instead of 3 to 4. The only reason because worried about people feeling like they're going to get ganged up on by pro-lifers if they come to the table. Although if some of those people are already in their own dialogues, then that's not an issue. Like, what were you guys doing to help make it feel like people are not going to get ganged up on if they come to the table?
If there's a time where no one is in a conversation, then all 4 people don't stay at the table.
Got it.
You'll have 1 or 2 people just kind of like take a step back, go get a drink of water, like move away and be around, but not right there. And then they can come and tap in if somebody gets into a conversation. I think frequently we tend to have 3 or 4 conversations going at a time, which is super awesome.
I saw that when I was there.
But if you don't have that, then be prepared that it might happen, but don't have everybody just like standing there awkwardly. I would never want to have probably more than 2 people not in a conversation at any one time. Like there can be 2 people standing there doing nothing. There shouldn't be 3 or 4 people standing there doing nothing.
I agree.
That's just a little awkward. You should also be careful, unfortunately, about the number of males at the table. We are always really careful. Ever since we had this really unfortunate thing happen with Joshua.
Oh, no.
Joshua is
I like
wonderful.
Joshua so much, and I'm about to hear a painful story.
Well, it's not that bad.
Okay.
But Joshua was my co-president. And there was this one time that we were setting up the outreach table, and specifically Meredith and Joshua were setting up the outreach table. I was not there yet. The 2 of them were dealing with putting it up. And we had planned it so that Joshua would not be alone. Like, this was we had thought this through. And the 2 of them are setting it up, and Meredith needed to walk away for like 2 seconds. She was like going to grab a piece of tape or something like from the next room. Like she was literally gone for 2 seconds. In that span of time, someone walked by, instantly snapped a picture of Joshua alone by our outreach. He wasn't even standing there ready to do conversations. He was like setting it up. It was on social media in about 5 seconds. And some pro-life friends in the college found it and told me about it. And there were some very, very, very nasty comments from other St. Olaf students in that thread about how dare this male, whatever, like there's just pro-life guys. They're the only people in this club. We don't have to listen. Like all the bad comments were there. And someone approached Joshua And he just felt very uncomfortable, understandably, even though Meredith came back and like Meredith walked back in and was like, oh no, because she could like see what had just happened.
Yeah.
And it was absurd that like we have to be so worried about that.
Right. Yeah. So let's just make clear for anyone, if this is your first podcast, we'll be very clear. What we are not saying is that men shouldn't talk about abortion. Like, that's not the view. It's not that like Joshua shouldn't have been there. It's just that, unfortunately, the way that people think about abortion right now is that it's weird for men to be talking about it. We want to change that. And I think we have a really good response to the question of why do you, I mean, which is basically, I have to use this in every conversation I have. At some point, I'm going to have to prove why I get a right to talk about this as a dude. Like, it's just going to be part of every conversation I have. Fine. I'm happy to do that. But at an optics level, for people walking by, it's an awkward looking picture. And I will tell you, I have got a story of this too. It's just a miracle that there wasn't a picture taken of this, because it would have been so bad. When we did our outreach at UC Davis, the most volatile outreach we've ever had, there was vandalism. There was like physically kind of threatening, aggressive behavior. It could have gotten a lot worse than it did, but it got pretty bad, although there are a lot of pro-life activists that have dealt with worse. But for us, it's by far the most hostile situation that we've had on a campus. And there was just an unfortunate thing where we had done a seminar. I think we did 2 seminars before that outreach. And just, we had volunteers, and we'd mainly trained adults. This wasn't mainly students. We had kind of been invited in by kind of another pro-life group. And so most of the volunteers were like 40 or older. And so this a lot of the people that we were training. And there was a certain time, like maybe a couple of hours at outreach, where all of the volunteers available were guys. We didn't have any female staff members that were there. We had brought one, but she got really sick. Like, as soon as we arrived, she was not able to be there. So there's all these guys, mainly adults, and we're being protested by like 10 young women. And it was just like optically the worst thing ever. It is a miracle that there aren't pictures, but we were all like, we know this is not ideal. This is not optimal. And it's unfortunate, but it is the reality that we live in. So we've always tried to have at least one woman there, or one guy, one woman, if it's not like 2 women at the table, because we want people to come and talk to us. And hopefully by the end of the conversation, they'll realize that it's totally fine for guys to talk about this too, but they might not understand that on their own.
Right. And so we need to help create an environment where they're going to want to come over.
Yes.
And it also just took some time for us to realize, and mainly for Joshua and Alex, who are kind of our first 2 guys who are doing tabling, to realize that they probably were going to be the last people to get a conversation.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's just kind of the way it works. Joshua will talk about it to this day. Like, if I'm standing at the table with Joshua, I will always be the first person to get a conversation.
Yep.
And then only when I am full will someone start talking to Joshua.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much the reality of campus outreach at this point. Like, unless you invite Joshua into your conversation and he's like part of this now, who is going to walk up to the guy first? I think I've had the experience of maybe at outreach, sometimes pro-choice guys coming up to me first, instead of like if Rachel was there. I imagine that has happened, although I haven't paid a ton of attention. Like, were those times when Rachel wasn't already in any conversation? But certainly it's been very rare for a pro-choice woman to walk up to me or like Tim or Jacob to have a conversation.
Unless it's because they're really mad that you're there.
Exactly. And if they
really
are,
mad, they're going to you.
Then it's not going to be a fun conversation. It's going to be a lot of yelling, and I'm listening to this person rant about me about how I want her to be in Handmaid's Tale land, Gilead, or whatever. It's going to be that kind of a thing. And unless I can like de-escalate it like down the road. So yeah, that's just, it's hard. Like, please, pro-life women at these clubs, like, have sympathy for the dudes in your club, because it's just going to be hard for them. And that's why it's so helpful. And we've had clubs where like the women in the club are really like alert kind of for that kind of thing happening, and are quick to like defend the guys that are in the club. Like, no, he's not this misogynistic, like whatever, like that you think it, like that's not this person. Just kind of be there and be, an encouragement for those guys, because as much as you think outreach sucks, it sucks more for the guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we had planned on talking about both outreach mistakes and dialogue mistakes in one episode, but we've been going for longer than we planned. So let's stop it here. Next episode, we'll transition from talking about like mistakes with the ways that you guys did outreach and move more towards ways that you guys made mistakes and how you were doing your dialogues, which I think will be really helpful for all of the people that are listening that haven't had as much dialogue experience, but they've been learning pro-life apologetics. They want to start having these dialogues. And as great as you guys are, you guys still made a lot of dialogue mistakes too. And so we'll look forward to talking about that in the next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Equipped for Life podcast, a project of Equal Rights Institute. Equal Rights Institute uses speaking, writing, YouTube videos, podcasts, online courses, and campus outreach to help pro-life advocates in the areas of practical dialogue tips, relational apologetics, pro-life philosophy, and sidewalk counseling. If you've been helped by this podcast, please consider supporting it by making a donation at equalrightsinstitute.com.